My presentation is called Nomadic Art, Decolonizing the Human and the Posthuman. And I'm going to start right away with with a quote by Stuart Hall, which goes, migration is a one-way trip. There is no home to go back to, there never was. And this is a quote that somehow resonates personally to me, but it's also a quote which I think has a very strong universal sense or value, in the sense that migration is becoming more and more a universal condition for many people around the world. But something that struck me as quite strange is the fact that the word migrant isn't really used universally. So if you are a white, middle-class, Western European male, you're very unlikely to be called a migrant. You may be called a foreigner or an expat or even an alien resident, which is definitely strange. And that led me to think about, the reason why we are always trying to somehow erase our common humanity. And it's not really just a matter of semantics. If you think about the rising wave of populism that we are experiencing here in Europe, we have governments that are pretty much neo-fascist and are always trying to turn migrant boats away from our borders into dangerous waters. That would be my country where I come from, Italy. I currently live in Portugal. Over here, we also have extreme right-wing party that seems to be blaming everything possible and imaginable to gypsy communities. And on the left side of the political spectrum, what we see is left populists also blaming high taxation and rising living costs on people such as digital nomads, or even elderly foreign retirees. So it seems that all sorts of nomadic forms of living are coming under attack nowadays. And it is a little bit difficult to make sense of this. And as I try to find answers, I go and read works by scholars that I find, inspiring. And here I like to mention Rosie Braidotti and her book Nomadic Theory, Achille Mbembe and his work called Out of the Dark Nights. And what these academics do is kind of pointing out the paradoxes of our times, and at the same time urging us to think about a new paradigm or new ways of thinking things. And really remember, I somehow went back to the work of Frantz Fanon, who, as early as the 1960s was telling us that blackness is somehow a zone of non-being. It lacks that ontological stability within Western discourse. And, Mbembe talks about Fanon as the, ultimate theorist of decolonization, because it sees it not just as the hermeneutics, but also as a pedagogy. And as I read all this, I started to ask myself the question, and also it's coming from my interest in posthumanism. I say, well, if humanity is not a given, it's something that we need to make to rise somehow. Does it even make sense to talk about posthumanism? So shouldn't we further deconstruct our colonial histories and our conceptions of race? And if we want to talk about the move from the human to the posthuman, then what kind of posthumanism should we think about? How can we imagine a form of posthumanism which is reflective and also deeply critical? And I like to try also and find answers outside of academia somehow, and engage in transdisciplinarity and look at the work of artists. And today I wanted to bring to you two works by Afro-Portuguese artists who were born within the context of political decolonization. So I'm going to start with the first one. Her name is Grada Quilomba, and the work that I will introduce is called Ubarco, which means the boat. And what this is a installation and also a public performance that took place in 2021 on the Lisbon riverside. And what Quilomba does is she places blocks of burnt wood with poems inscribed on them in the form of a boat in this public square. And why she does that is because the boat is a symbol of of colonialism, rather, and it is often represented in public discourse, as a symbol of the so-called discoveries, as something which is heroic in a way. And Quilomba asks us to rethink this, to think, who was in the hold of those boats? And what were they doing there? Who put them there and for what reason? And then we start to imagine that these boats were actually prisons or chambers of torture as well. And what makes the work very interesting is that it is located just a few minutes walking from this museum, this monument, which you see on the screen, is called the Monument to the Discoveries, which is a very controversial monument here in Lisbon, which is somehow a glorification of empire, and which was built in the 1960s, pretty much as a nostalgic act at the twilight of the colonial war. And there has been a lot of polemics around this monument here in Lisbon recently. It was vandalized as well. People are saying, should we demolish it? Should we not have it here at all? But what Quilomba does is letting us think a little bit more deeply, rather than being always embroiled in these polemics. We should think and challenge the cartographic violence that we have in our city, and also this type of childish and violent vocabulary that we use. How can we call discovery an act in which we colonize and inflict violence on people in a continent that was there already for a long time? So we did not really discover anything. So it is time to really start thinking differently in terms of our history. And this might be the first step to also break this cycle of violence that we're embroiled in. The second artist that I wanted to introduce today is called Welket Bungwe. And he was born in Guinea-Bissau, grew up in Portugal, and now works pretty much globally as an actor, but also as a director of his own film productions. What I want to show you today is a work called Mudança, which means upheaval or change. And it is pretty much a multidisciplinary project in the sense that it takes the format of a short film, but it was filmed in a theater, and it includes music, dance, projection, and poetry. And what Bungwe does, he talks about decolonization with a very interesting and multi-layered narrative. He starts from some poems that his dad wrote while he was fighting on the side of the Portuguese in the colonial wars. And then he worked together with a public figure, a woman called Jocine Catar Moreira, who at the time of release of this film was actually a member of parliament in Portugal. And so together with the poetry from Bungwe's father, what we hear is Moreira's own experiences as a Black female politician in nowadays politics in Portugal. Finally, within the narrative of this film, we also have a focus on traditional epistemologies of the Bijavo people of Guinea-Bissau. And the way that Bungwe presents them is saying that actually they did not believe in a separation between human and non-human, people and nature. They saw that as a unity, and this unity somehow was challenged in the colonial encounter and through the industrial revolution, and bringing not a lot of good things, really, mostly violence and possession. So he's asking us to rethink this. And he is also defining himself as a citizen artist, someone who is peripheral in nature, who's always on the move and in transit between different places, but also different concepts. and works with culture in a way that I would describe nomadic. Also, borrowing this word from Deleuze, from ReDICo, with the use of situated knowledge and basically challenging traditional concepts of history, of identity, of subjectivity to create a sort of radical pedagogy, which is found both in West's work, but also very much in Quilomba. So as I, approach these works, then I somehow revisit my question of whether we should be talking about a move to the post-human. And the problem here is that in some of the main literature of post-humanism, we seem to see that race is somehow underplayed. There isn't a big discussion of race because somehow it's seen as an overtly humanistic topic. And I have been inspired very much by the work of Zakia Iman-Jackson, but also Zai Dalua, who are themselves post-humanists, but challenge this view. They say that our academic discourse and all this discussion of deconstructing the human in reality is based on racialized epistemologies, where ontology in itself is the case of white privilege, just as Fanon mentioned in that quote that I showed you before. And that really also brought my attention to the fact that perhaps a form of critical and reflective posthumanism should really challenge the concept of whiteness. Whiteness somehow is this invisible universal that has this ontological primacy, whereas blackness somehow it's always marked as a color, and at the same time lacks that ontological stability. So therefore, in this light, we should not only decolonize the human, but we should decolonize the post-human. And even more, what we should do is we should question the foundations of Western philosophy, and especially the aspect of dualism. So rather than always thinking about a world which is, defined through dichotomies, where you have one term which is the strongest dominant one, and the second term which is almost there to confirm the existence of the first one, we should try to explore different epistemologies. I think this is a strong learning that we get from the work of Volker Bungwe and his reference to the Bijago people. And also, I personally feel that in order to explore with a wider angle, what we need to do is to not just promote transdisciplinarity within academia. What we have to do is as well work closely with artists, with migrant and local communities. And at the basis of it all, I would also propose it is somehow a rethinking of this idea of human privilege. Too often we think human privilege is a zero-sum game. So actually a better sharing of that privilege, both intellectually, but also physically, economically, and socially, may be really the starting point to break the deadlock of Europopulism and neo-fascism, which are very much a problem in our current society. And this was pretty much all. And I'd like to thank you for your attention. And I'm also very happy to answer any question or engage in further discussion with you.